for this session, turn our gaze a little bit outside of MIT because we want to give space to representatives from other institutions that have been innovating and have been working on free speech and civil dialogue in their own ways, and we're very happy to have them here, and we're happy to have Bryan Paul, our friend from the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, moderating this session, reprising his duties from last year. So, Bryan, I'm going to hand it to you now.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to be back, and thank you all for being here today. It is a thrill to be back here in Cambridge with all of you. It's a pleasure to be engaged in this important movement to foster free expression, academic freedom, and viewpoint diversity on our college campuses. And many of you are striving to do just that at MIT and ACTA and the College Debates and Discourse Alliance, of which I'm a part, which includes ACTA, as well as Braver Angels and Bridge USA, stand with you and are eager to continue to work with you and all other alumni and others concerned about these issues as we move forward. It's a thrill to also be here as part of this esteemed panel of administrators and trustees who have worked hard themselves to try to foster free expression, academic freedom, and viewpoint diversity at their own institutions. We are specifically joined today by Jason Merchant, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs from the University of Chicago, David Reingold, Senior Vice President for Policy Planning and the Justin S. Morrill Dean, College of Liberal Arts, Purdue University, Ramsey White, Trustee, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and Joseph Gearo, Assistant Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Students, Adelphi University. It's great to be here. I very much look forward to guiding this conversation. We're going to kick it right off with an opening question, and as they see fit, each of the panelists may introduce themselves all the more through the course of our conversation here. But I want to start off with the question, how would each of you describe the state of higher education today? And Jason, perhaps we could start with you and then make our way down the panel.
Thanks, and thanks for the invitation, and thanks for the organizers for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the things we're doing at the University of Chicago to forward and promote free speech, free inquiry, free expression, and institutional neutrality. So I think to answer your question is you don't have to take my word for it. There have been surveys this year and the past year, and I think everyone who's in higher ed, and especially in leadership positions in higher ed, see this as a four-alarm fire that a majority of Americans no longer have faith in higher ed. This is a disaster for our industry. Anyone who cares about higher ed in the United States should be viewing this with great alarm. And it's for a lot of different reasons, which we can talk about. But I know that everyone who believes, as I do, that the university system in the United States is the best in the world for the reasons that it has, over the past 50 years, sought to enroll and hire the very best people in all the fields from around the world, view and should view the higher education system as a jewel in America's educational system that deserves protecting. And I think one of the things we're going to talk about today is just the kinds of things that we're trying to do that.
Jody Gearo, Assistant Vice President and Dean of Students at Adelphi University on Long Island. In terms of the state of higher education, I think one of the terms that comes to mind for me is vulnerable. Scrutinized, there's a lot of expectations, there's a lot of scrutiny from various different areas, as was mentioned. Parents being one, the whole question of the value of an education. There's also significant pressure from the government, federal and state. Specifically, maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it today. This policy creep in terms of, I think, maybe initiating with things like Title IX, but now Title VI also being looked at again in terms of, maybe something doesn't violate a policy, but it might contribute to a hostile environment. So schools have to address that too. So There's a lot of conflicting expectations for colleges and universities, and I think it's becoming more and more challenging for the leadership to be able to please each and every one of those constituents that are out there, all of whom do wield some sort of power. So I think right now there's a little bit of instability, I think.
Hi, I'm Ramsey White, and I am a trustee at UNC Chapel Hill. And it's interesting that you said vulnerable, because I think that's a fair assessment. From my perspective, I would say it's in transit. I'm more hopeful. I think there's more positive perspectives that are being heard from where I sit. And I had a boss once say, and I think this is a good quotation to attribute to this, is that no one likes change but a wet baby. And so that's why I would say we're in transit. But we're learning about change and what that can mean for universities.
I have a 7-month-old who can attest to that.
Yeah.
David Reingold, Purdue University, and delighted to be here, and thank you for the MIT Free Speech Alliance for the opportunity. I guess I'm hopeful, but I'm also mindful that I think higher education is at an inflection point right now in the United States, and we have become, unfortunately, sort of a laughingstock in American society. And it worries me greatly in terms of what it means for the future of higher education vis-a-vis sort of the standing of the United States and our ability to actually sort of continue to be a leading superpower. It reminds, one of the things that I was looking at, to put this in historical perspective, and I don't know how many people know this, but MIT is such a special place in many ways, not just because the dome here, I think it's called the Dome, is made out of Indiana limestone, as somebody who's from Indiana, and so noticed these things. But in 1949, Winston Churchill came to MIT to address the faculty here, and in his speech, which is a great speech, and I don't know if he ever gave a bad speech, but it was a great speech, and one of the reasons why he came to MIT was because he wanted to pay special recognition to the role that institutions like MIT played in the ability of the Americans to win World War II and to save Europe. And what he called out MIT for, in particular, was not only its technical prowess, and I come from another institution that sort of is STEM focused, and just how important it is to have those kinds of institutions. But he bemoans the fact that the universities in his country, which were obviously some of the oldest and most sort of celebrated institutions, whether it's Oxford, Cambridge, or King's College or the like, did not rise to the occasion during World War II. It was institutions like MIT, Purdue, others that did. And it wasn't just their technical prowess, but it was their commitment to a set of values and norms in combination with their ability on the technical side to give America the advantage, which allowed the Allies to win that war. And what did he mean by those values and norms? He actually calls out specifically, he praises, and this sort of touches my heart, MIT's president at the time for maintaining a dean of the humanities. And what he was talking about was the fact that the institution had embraced a set of norms and values around inquiry, around truth-seeking, that were not colored by ideology or prefixed notions of morality. And it was truth-seeking and knowledge seeking for its own sake, and the norms needed to be established to do that. And part of doing that meant to be a place that also was home to a variety of scholars from a range of institutions. And so I guess I worry about where we are in a meta level in terms of our ability as a country to maintain our standing. Higher education in the United States has been it's been one of the great achievements for the country in the 20th century. people who want to come to our institutions from all over the world for a reason. And I think that's at risk.
So in this context of uncertainty, scrutiny, a promise, an opportunity, even vulnerability, I would love for us to talk a bit more about what all of you are striving to do at your respective institutions. Tell us what you are doing, what your institutions have in terms of programming and other initiatives that are striving to help students face the issues of the day, help your institutions navigate them, and even help students simply be students and engage in that learning process.
Sure.
Whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to talk. Of course, we do a lot at the University of Chicago. We are very fortunate to have
I've heard of you, yes.
an institutional commitment to this, both on the free expression, free speech, free inquiry side, as well as on the principles of institutional neutrality, which I think form a very crucial binary in allowing universities to flourish and be the truth-seeking institutions that really are devoted solely to the discovery, preservation, and dissemination of knowledge. We have lots of programs, and I think this is crucial. We heard a little bit on the panel this morning from Professor Hosoi, who was on the CAFC committee, that education and engaging the community have fallen by the wayside, were her words, a little bit. And I want to point out that many universities are just like the University of Chicago and having pretty good statements around what it means to promote free speech and free expression on campus. But that, of course, is not enough. You need a culture that allows that, and it's a constant effort of educating not just the students, but also the faculty, the staff, the alumni, the parents, and others, the community members, because it really is, it requires a whole culture of expression to be able to do what we do. And I'll say just two things about what we do. So we do, orientation is a very important event. It's when you orient students to the university, both undergraduate and graduate. And we're very explicit in including our commitment to free expression. The president addresses all of the new students, both graduate and undergraduate, and I can tell you on Tuesday, because I was there, that's exactly what he talked about. We then have an Aims of Education address, which is given by the faculty every year, and then small group discussions led by faculty of the entire incoming undergraduate class of 15 to 20 students talking about the aims of education. That's an address that has gone back for decades. We also distribute the Chicago Canon, which is a new publication that sort of summarizes and pulls together in one place a bunch of documents from our history, as well as speeches and position statements from Chicago to all of the students. I mean, I could go on because I lead a lot of workshops for incoming faculty. All the new faculty get to hear a speech from me about the Calvin. We do workshops with new deans and new chairs. Those are very important groups because they're on the front lines for upholding institutional neutrality. And I have to say, I'm very pleased that so many universities have come around to the view that this is important. I think this year everybody saw how useful it is for universities not to be in the line for taking institutional stances. At the University of Chicago, nobody expected us to, after October 7th, to come out with a statement. We didn't have these discussions because we already had said over and over again that this is not our job, this is your job. In the words of the Calvin Report, the university is the home and sponsor of critics. It is not itself the critic, right? Students and faculty, their jobs are to think about things, advocate for things, change society if need be, but it is not the university's job per se as an institution to do that. And I just want to end with one thing. We get a lot of credit for the Calvin Report, and I'm happy to ride those coattails. Harry Calvin was a brilliant First Amendment scholar. He chaired that committee in 1967, and I think he wrote a beautiful, and with his committee, a beautiful 1.5-page statement of why it's so important. A really articulate expression of those values, but they are not new, not to these universities, not to our university. Our very first president in 1900 reiterated a faculty convocation statement that the faculty had voted on in 1899 that said the university will not be a disputant on public issues, right? And so we've subscribed to this, and of course, like I said, Yale has the Woodbridge Report. There's many universities have statements along those lines, but it really requires that the leadership believe in it and reiterate it at every possible opportunity so that everybody understands we mean it. That's basically what I'd
I'd
say.
love to give you some more coattails to ride on here, Mr. Vice President, because I see here on LinkedIn an announcement that just came out from University of Chicago, or at least they just announced it on LinkedIn, that the university has received a $100 million gift to support its leadership on the practices of free expression and advancement of the work of the University of Chicago Forum for Free Inquiry and Expression. And that particular forum is relatively new, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah. So the new president, Paul Adelphi, created it as one of his first acts, following on Bob Zimmer's wonderful leadership over the past 15 years, and appointed a faculty director, an executive director, and they've already organized a bunch of things, and they've been working on campus. You don't need $100 million to do this work, although it will certainly help.
I can think of a lot of good things to do, yes. Perhaps maybe a little, as we continue this conversation, give us a little more insight in that process if you do have any other insight. But please, others of our panel, what have your institutions been doing?
Well, I appreciate Jason's references to culture. Adelphi University is the oldest institution on Long Island, and as such has had the ability to develop a culture. And it likes to pride itself on things like courtesy and respect, and sometimes that gets in the way of me when I'm wearing my Dean of Students hat, because I want students to engage vigorously with ideas and learn from being tested in those ideas. So sometimes I tend to be a little provocative in my approach to sort of challenge that culture. And regarding specific programs, last year I started our first symposium on freedom of expression, and it's a week-long series of events that takes place in October during Free Speech Week. I'm hoping it'll be an annual event. This is our second year, and it seems to have taken off, so that's positive. Nadine Strawson is going to be our keynote speaker. I think she's been here to this body as well. And we're getting some attention, which is nice. In fact, I think that might be one of the reasons I was invited here. We've done some other things, somewhat controversial, but that seems to be my approach. I started a bias response team on our campus because I wanted to do that before anyone else did, because I didn't trust anyone else's approach to it. And I was afraid that a bias response team would move in a direction that was counter to creating opportunities for free speech. So very carefully made it clear that the bias response team did not have any sort of authority to sanction or impose any other kind of ramifications for speech, and that it was specifically designed to provide resources and to encourage people to be able to express their ideas in a way that could be heard. That got a lot of attention also. Had to go up to the Board of Trustees, and our executive leadership challenged them with, well, don't you want somebody on campus who's willing to take a look at, when a student accuses you of a microaggression? Don't you want someone who can help to sort of untangle that? We had folks on our executive leadership board who had been accused of all kinds of things from students who didn't like one approach or another, or the use of one word or another. So got approval for that. We also started a care team, which has a similar thrust. It's really to support students who are experiencing any sort of roadblock or challenge. Many of those challenges are social.
And if I may ask, what safeguards are in place for the bias response team specifically to ensure that it does not devolve into the stereotypical thought or speech police that can sometimes be seen as with the underlying ideology that often accompanies it?
So you've caught me. The bias response team is me. And that's why I did it.
No bias intended there.
So Well, when I designed it, what I essentially did was I created a platform for people to report bias. And that platform allows people, anyone, to really go to an online form, a Maxium report form, and report bias and provide the description. Those come directly to me. I have partnered with some other people on campus who have either been trained or have some background in dialogue and in conflict resolution. I'm a New York State certified mediator. I've done some work on conflict resolution, shuttle diplomacy, different approaches. And so I've tapped into some other folks on campus who have very specific skill sets like those. And so when one of those complaints comes in, I then will feed that out to someone. And essentially the protocol that is in place, which also helps, is we pull in the party, if they're willing, who's made the complaint, to ask them to tell us what the complaint is, what they think should be done. And we talk through it with them in very specific ways. Do you want us to approach the person? Yeah, you should tell them. Are they going to know who this came from? Oh, yeah, they might know. Well, are you sure you want us to talk to them about this? And, well, I'm not sure. So it's engaging in a dialogue to make sure that the person who comes forward with a complaint, we had a complaint, a student came on campus with a Jeep that was painted in the American flag, and it was reported to the bias response team as a form of bias and racism that we needed to suspend and expel this.
It's almost a dialogic model versus a surveillance model.
Exactly.
Interesting. Ramsey, I'm uniquely interested in UNC. Please tell us more about what's going on there.
Yes. Well, from my perspective of being a board member, I think our most notable kind of program that we developed is SKILL, which you probably all heard about, the School for Civic Life and Leadership. But kind of to back into that, it started well before the school was actually created. So from when I came on the board, we adopted the Calvin Report and the Chicago Principles, which was sending a message to campus and to faculty that this was important. And from there, there was a survey that was done on all of the constituencies, all the campuses under the UNC system. So it was our data with our students. And it basically came back and said that most students are, as we heard in the earlier panel, self-censoring. And it was, the majority was conservative students. So we were presented this information unsolicited and are scratching our heads going, well, what can we do to change? And we had an off-site meeting, and actually ACTA was involved and was very helpful in giving us different examples that were going on at Princeton, Arizona State. And what we came up with was a resolution that we presented in our January meeting of that year, which said that we wanted to start a school for civic life and leadership, and that we wanted, the key piece was 20 faculty members, tenured faculty members from outside the university. And the rest is history. We've hired a dean, Jed Adkins, who has hired 11 faculty members from other schools in 6 months, which is very impressive. And I think what I give you that example is, my perspective is personnel is policy. Another thing that we have, approved, if you will, as a board is we have had, I think, 13 different deans change. And so we've had to perform searches, not the board personally, but there have been committees that the chancellor has put together that are representative of faculty and staff and students. But I think those are the ways that you can really change what's going on your campus. And these men here today are representative of that. It's who's in the classroom, who is teaching the student, who is making decisions on policy and code, or university code as we call it. So really proud of what we've done.
I was going to say the who, we frequently refer to it as the who before the what. You got to get the people sort of right. And I was going to say, Jay, I went to high school at the University of Chicago and also did all my graduate work, so I'm like celebrating with you guys for all the great achievements. And I would say, probably in terms of sort of what is the formula for institutions, obviously all of our major research universities in America are unique, in many ways. They have their own histories and their own patterns and cultures. And so I guess a bit of the formula I'm going to say, I think you have to sort of tweak it a bit from institution to institution, but I think it will serve many of the AAU institutions, which MIT is a proud member of. So I think what was just mentioned here, I agree 100%. You have to have alignment. You got to somehow get alignment between a board, a president, and a set of deans on mission alignment as it relates to the sort of the normative values of the institution. Now that is a hard thing to just whip up, right? I mean, but that is, if you're fighting if you're pushing against that tide, very, very hard to make progress. So alignment across the sort of the top line leaders who have responsibility for the academic enterprise. If you've done that, some of the other things I think are actually more straightforward, and I think others have mentioned it. My institution has sort of has done these things over the past decade or so. Adopt the Chicago principles. Adopt the Calvin report. These are, as others have mentioned, these are great, thoughtful documents. You don't have to recreate these things. Well, you can. I guess there's been some work here to start, but you don't have to. I'd say, as a general principle, don't cancel events. Don't cancel speakers. All right. You might not like who these folks are and what they have to say, but you just that's what universities are about. All right. And anybody who's calling for canceling anything, just don't. It will not end well. Socialize every student into the normative value system around freedom of expression and freedom of speech. Now, you've heard some examples here. Every institution sort of does it differently. At Purdue, we have we operate at a different scale, 10,000 new beginners each year. It's a land-grant public research university of the state. So, 10,000 students, we get an orientation session on free inquiry and freedom of speech. We engage we do role-playing exercises. We have our theater department doing scenarios with students. It's all on video, and we put that out there much like these other institutions. Every faculty member has to know what the rules of the road are and the parameters, and there's got to be a way to make sure that they know that. When you're recruiting faculty members as well as students, I think Chicago does this better than most. We are a little more skittish on it. Tell students, hey, if you want to come to an institution which defends the rights of people to engage in free speech and free inquiry, this is the place for you. If that's going to make you uncomfortable, maybe there's another institution out there for you. And I've heard Paul say that. Some institutions aren't quite that forward on it, but also important. And then recruit faculty who embrace these values. Now this gets tough because faculty don't. I've been a faculty member for 28 years and a dean for way too many years. So faculty members feel like they have the right to hire who they want to hire, and you've got to find a way to get it out in front there that the folks you want to hire are people that share the sort of the values of the institution. And there are lots of different ways to do that. I think, and the curricular side, having a means by which at the undergraduate level, we talk about graduate education. At the undergraduate level, you can embed aspects of these norms into the curriculum that touches everybody. So, I was very impressed by the concourse program. My response was, why not concourse for all? It sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like there are 50 students a year that sort of get that exposure. But what about every MIT student? Chicago has, the sort of the Great Books program, which, is a storied history. Purdue has the Cornerstone program. We have curricular efforts that are sort of meaningful and significant for all first-year students, where you have places to sort of put this content in front of these students and help them along as you go. So, I think you'll find aspects of this, including in the new citizenship school and in all of our institutions. But that would be my playbook. And then, and I would sort of say the motto is not to be an echo chamber and not to be a surveillance state. So that's what you're trying to accomplish.
Powerful, concrete examples of what all of you are doing, and I fully admit my bias to you, Joe, that is leading toward this. As we all know, though, a lot of this is easier said than done. It can be relatively easy to adopt the Chicago principles and the Calvin Report, and maybe that's different for each institution. I have my question for all of you that I'm sure many of us would love to know: what is the secret sauce to helping an institution walk the walk after they've talked the talk?
I feel like probably they should start at the other end this time.
You want to hear? Well, I still think it's personnel is policy. It's the who before the what. I mean, you got to get the people in positions of responsibility who actually, sort of believe in these norms and these values. And it can't just be the board. It can't just be the president, and it can't just be a dean. You've got to get alignment across, up and down that hierarchy, and that is, and it's super tough. I mean, there are very few institutions that sort of are able to do that, but you got to start somewhere. So that's
Ramsey?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. The personnel equals policy, I mean, very much the who, what, I think that's part of it, or basically all of it. I would say, too, that you really need to remember why you're doing it and think about the students. So, when you're getting feedback from your campuses and your university that there's a problem or that they want to be taught a different way, I mean, you have to listen to that. And it's interesting when you're talking about alignment, that I think governance, and one of the things that maybe some of you in the room don't know, and nor should you, but at UNC there's a system, and it has, I think it's 19 institutions underneath the system, 17 of which are higher education. And the North Carolina Constitution delegates responsibility of universities to the legislature. And the North Carolina taxpayers fund the universities, and the legislature appoints the boards of trustees, which is where I come in for my campus, UNC Chapel Hill. And I think that's one thing to remember, is that while on campus, a certain group of people, for instance, perhaps the faculty, might have ideas about how the campus should be run, you have to remember that, or in our instance, that there's a structure and there's governance of how decisions are to be made about the university.
I love the framing of the question, the secret sauce. I wish I had that secret sauce. I would agree that it has to very much involve the who and the hiring. I would add to that, though, that the values of the institution are absolutely critical, and they're probably there and can be leveraged maybe a little bit more effectively. So, I got my MBA in management, and we talked a lot about mission-driven, and it's said a lot, but it's not always implemented so well. And one of the things that I found useful is to always go back to the institutional mission and the strategic priorities, and to connect freedom of expression to those priorities, those institutional priorities. And the more directly, I spend a lot of time on language that will directly connect the reason that I think we need to have the provost personally invite a faculty member to be at the Freedom of Expression Symposium is because of this connection regarding free inquiry at the institution. The things we say are important to us. These values are critical, and one of the things I think we have to be cautious about is the sense of panic that sometimes works its way in to policies and to enforcement of policies. Often it's contributed to by the news cycle. But what happens is the institutional interest in protecting itself and moving quickly often causes policy development, which can then be sort of detached from those values that the institution says are important. So for someone to come in, even me, I say I'm provocative, but to challenge that, as long as I'm saying, well, wait, this is what we say we stand for, if I can rely on those principles and those values that have been stated, our president is on the record saying we're a place where we respect viewpoint diversity. Now, she doesn't say it that often, but I only have to find it in writing once to bring it up. And so that's the kind of thing that I've done to keep us connected to the values.
I'd second that, and I would say the phrase diversity of viewpoint is actually in the Calvin report. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we hire faculty who really are diverse in their views, including around things like the Chicago Principles and the Calvin Report. So there are very active debates on campus about the applicability, the scope of those things, and how to administer them. And we don't shy away from those debates. We host panels. We had several in the past year, faculty panels of people who were taking all sides of whether the Calvin Report was the right way to run an institution like ours. And these are our own faculty members. We have the same thing on the Chicago Principles. We have faculty members, I've co-taught with them, who think that, and who have said in class to students that free speech is a right-wing Trojan horse for conservative ideas. And some of those faculty changed their views this year, of course. But those are like the healthy things. We have the core, the Common Core. I was a core coordinator for 7 years, and every week the faculty who were teaching in this core, we would meet. We would convene to talk about that week's readings. Not that we would all agree on the approaches, but we would have a discussion around what was important, what wasn't important, and there was a lot of viewpoint diversity. And I don't think it's important. Universities can't shy away from that. They need to provide venues for it because, in the words of John Stuart Mill, right, the better you understand your opponent's argument, the better you understand your own. And I do think that those have been very useful on our campus in helping change faculty minds. It's one of the goals of the Forum for Free Inquiry and Expression is to make people see that there is a great value to this and that individual rights to expression are protected by institutional neutrality, that the chilling effect, not just on students and junior faculty, but on potential students and potential faculty, the people outside who we want them to apply to our programs, we want them to apply to our jobs, that if a department of so-and-so takes a stance on something, they don't know, they may all agree on that, but there is no way to reach a unanimous viewpoint on any topic in the academy without chilling potential dissenters, including ones who may not be at the university at the moment that vote was taken. And so part of our job is, of course, we've been talking a lot about education and all of these things. It's an ongoing process, but part of it is also compliance. You need a leadership, like David said, that goes from the Board of Trustees, includes the provost and president, and talks to the deans, is willing to, usually behind the scenes, have discussions with departments that have stepped over the bounds, right? The compliance with, we are at all universities at this point are enormous organizations that run with great autonomy in lots of different areas, rightly so, because that's the nature of a decentralized research-driven university. But that means that we're going to get lots of different applications of policy that we didn't even realize, right? The president doesn't look at all of these things, but the provost's office does have a mechanism for dealing with complaints of many people who say, well, doesn't this violate the Calvin Principles? And sometimes it does. We look into it, and then we have a discussion with leadership about what to do about it. And I think that piece is crucial because it does need that the president and provost are publicly out there in front of it. The deans and chairs are on the front line, and I'll say that the workshop that we run is for deans and chairs, but it's attended by the president and provost. It's convened by the president and provost. They sit there and they say some words at the beginning and at the end, and they sit there the whole time. Bob Zimmer was just sitting in that room listening to the whole workshop with scenarios and discussion, and the fact that he stayed was super important. The chairs and deans understood how important this was to the leadership of the university, so when they went out and needed to have these discussions without consulting with me or the president or the provost's office, they knew exactly what they could do on behalf of the Chicago Principles.
Did you have a comment as well, David?
Yeah, I just, on sort of how you establish sort of the frames around values and norms. I mean, I guess I'm mindful, you know, I'm here at another land-grant university. I think, you know, MIT is one of the 3 private land-grant universities in the United States that sort of came about through the Morrill Act. And, you know, one of the reasons, so you know, the Morrill Act and the creation of the land-grant universities, you know, were in part about establishing and building sort of the, you know, the mechanical arts and agriculture and connectivity to industry and science. But it was equally about preparing an educated citizenry for self-government and the concern that there just were not enough sort of responsible citizens who could engage in our form of self-government that we all depend on. And anyway, so you guys at MIT, I think, have, you know, you've got the full sort of full panoply of sort of history and sort of the normative story, I think, around sort of being leaders in this area. And in many ways, you know, I think the industry needs MIT to be a leader in this area.
If I am correct in my observations from earlier, I imagine we have a number of people who want to ask questions. So we're going to advance right into our Q&A. And is there someone who can help be the mic rover? So that can be you, Mr. President. Oh, we'll have to grab yours. Perfectly fine. So if you could just hold up your hands, if you have a question for our panel, we will try to get the mic to as many of you as possible. Try to make it as direct a question as possible so we can get to as many people as possible.
Good afternoon. My name's Pete Denton, class of 67. A question for your institutions. You're obviously not in private industry where hopefully the board of directors and CEO can fire somebody for whatever reason. Is it conceivable in your institutions that if you had a faculty member that continuously violated the Chicago principles, the report whose name I can never remember, could be terminated for that?
I can answer that. Yes. I think, you know, tenure has enormous protections, and it serves a lot of I think, important functions. But tenure is revocable by our trustees. And again, if you have alignment between a trustees, a president, and a dean, those kinds of personnel decisions are absolutely within the realm of the possible. And they have. So in my time, in my time, there have been. I've been a dean at Purdue for 10 years. These are all personnel cases, so I can't get into all the details. There are 9 tenured faculty members who are no longer tenured faculty members from my college for a variety of violations of the university's policies.
Anyone else want to chime in there?
Adelphi has not formally accepted or embraced either the Covenant report. So, you know, to answer the question is tricky, but to my knowledge, no one has been terminated for violating the principles that are held in either of the documents. Could they? Yeah, the same answer. Sure, they could. Yeah, I mean, they report to somebody, and they could.
So you have another question over here, and then we'll make the microphone up to the front.
I think there's a question here also.
We'll make our way up to the front here. Just one, go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Jackson, class of 13. So there's a lot of talk about how your university standing has fallen a bit in the U.S. and how you're trying to address free speech issues on campus. What I'm curious to know is how exactly are you framing the problem, and what are those KPIs that you're using to measure success? And then in that frame, how are you incorporating students, on campus, undergrads, grad students, alumni into measuring success of your policies and initiatives?
I'll say that's a great question. In a way, we do internal surveying, and we include questions around freedom of expression, of course. Our course evaluation forms include a question about ability to express oneself, both our undergrad and graduate courses. And we've recently started including questions about the Calvin Report. And what we found is that faculty are enormously supportive of the principle of institutional neutrality. We would like to get that number up. I don't remember the exact number, but it's a large majority, but we'd like to get it closer to 100%.
We're starting small. One of the things that I report to the Vice President for Student Affairs, and I am responsible for the assessment plan and the strategic plan for the division. So one of the things that I've done is taken the liberty to insert some KPIs into our strategic plan when he's not looking. And they're small because we need to start there to build consensus. But it will be things like making sure that resourcing the Symposium for Freedom of Expression is important. So, did you conduct the Freedom of Symposium? Did you invite external experts to come and speak? So I'm adding those, and as we get success, I'm hoping to begin expanding on them.
Yeah, I would just say, like I said earlier, there's a survey that was performed by UNC professors on the whole system, and so it's our own data, and we responded, like I said, with the resolution to create the School of Civic Life and Leadership. And I think one thing I'll say, and everyone in this room is doing a great job on considering programming, institutes, residential dorm, whatever it is, that's all wonderful, and that's the work that needs to be done. What was interesting about Skill is it's curricular based and it's degree seeking. So that was one of the things that we felt strongly about. I would say that. And then we also looked at our curriculum just broadly. And I think the panel, Angie, made a good point where she said, I think she said she was at Harvard, and we meaning students that I interacted with, really didn't have any education on the principles of freedom of expression and then how to do it and do it well. And I think that piece about the principles of freedom of expression, there is history that these students probably are not being taught or have access to as far as what courses are available. So that was a key piece with Skill, is to, one day I was in a meeting and I was researching our, the course catalog, and I typed in the word diversity. And there were, I don't know, probably 80 courses you should take. And I typed in the word democracy, and there were 3 courses you could take. So I think that's an example of how you can intertwine that into your curriculum. But I will say, as a trustee member, I have no hands-on curriculum. But that goes back to the personnel equals policy statement.
The only thing I'd add on this is, and I'm probably in the minority, I bet, in higher education, I look at the fire rankings. I'm looking at, I think that there's no. I think the data collection is that's being done of students is good. I mean, I'm a social scientist who spent my career collecting data. It's hard to collect data and to do it sort of in a precise and accurate way. I think that it's in everybody's interest to work with fire to continue to sort of strengthen and improve their data collection efforts, because it is the accountability mechanism, I believe, in terms of sort of where institutions are going to fall on this dimension, and so I think that's an important piece of for me in terms of sort of how we're doing year to year, and I've got my quibbles with sort of some of the things that they do on this, but I think all in all, it's sort of over time, you're seeing some real progress in that. So I think that's an important dimension, and so I would encourage folks. You're going to hear you'll hear a lot of my colleagues and colleagues in the academy, speaking negatively about fire and that survey and their rankings and the like. And I would say, I would recognize that there's some real value in that information. It's telling you something.
And let's go to the gentleman over here, and then we can have the microphone come to the front next.
James Malone. I've taken some executive development coursework here at MIT. Was not a full-time student here. Joseph, question specifically on something you said earlier, and maybe other folks could opine as well. You know, you talked about us being at a tenuous time. I heard dangerous time, and you talked about the different stakeholders, and then you spoke about the government. Would higher education be in a better place if the government stayed out of it?
I wanted on that.
So, yeah, that's the problem, right? I mean, the short answer, I'm going to give my opinion, my professional opinion. The short answer is absolutely, absolutely. You know, unfunded mandates of look, there's a lot to be said for Title IX and where it started, okay? It has, in more recent years, been redefined and re-regulated. It's, you know, now institutions are required to have a Title IX coordinator. That costs money. So now, of course, that impacts the value proposition to the institution when you start adding on to that. Again, now, the interpretations of Title VI. Well, it might not be a policy violation, but you still might run afoul of Title VI, so you got to do something about that. You know, there's part of the issue we have is the Title IV funding that institutions, when you talk about power over an institution, and you talk about the power that that students or you know, parents have, it's nowhere near the influence that the government has because of their ability to fund or not fund, and this sort of Damocles that Title IV poses, and that's real unfortunate. So I don't want to talk too long because people will call me a conspiracy theorist, but absolutely is my opinion.
Do you have thought, Alice?
I guess, you know, I think de Tocqueville was right about the sort of civil society in America being one of our sort of distinguishing traits and features, and I think the less government, that intrusion there is in civil society, and I think our educational institutions and higher education sort of are an important part of that fabric of civil society. So in an ideal world, I think, yes, you know, it's much better for our institutions to be able to act voluntarily. Voluntary action is much better. But I do think that, you know, the entire framework around which all of our institutions are bound together on this is our Constitution, which is an act of government. It is not, you know, this is not a bunch of institutions sort of coming together voluntarily and saying, oh, you know, the First Amendment, you know, we actually have to sort of follow that thing. So, you know, so I think government, you know, when our institutions sort of get off the rails and it looks like things are heading in a ditch, I think government absolutely has a right, and particularly in these public institutions, whether it's for the financial basis or just because these are the creation of a public body. And that public body absolutely has a right to be engaged.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a tricky question, and I'll give you a tricky answer, which is from Joe's perspective, I think yes. There's a lot of things, rules, laws, what have you, that you have to follow. Like I'll give you an example. When we were doing skill, you know, we got our hands slapped incorrectly with accreditation. I mean, that's one. And you know, what does that mean? And that's changed. So on the one hand, yes, I think that when government steps out, we're potentially not needed, yes. But on the other hand, with our specific situation with UNC, the state of North Carolina is very, very generous and is our partner and gives us not only lots of money, but you know, we have statutes that we have to follow, we have policies, and what we've all been talking about, when you're aligned, that's a powerful thing and a good thing. And it looks out for the people of North Carolina, everyone, not just the students that are on campus. So I think that's a tough one.
Anything you want to answer that, Jason?
I think it's a tough one too.
Very good. Well, let's come up here.
Harvey Silverglade. I am the co-author of The Shadow University in 1998 and the co-founder of FIRE in 1999. Since 1998, I have advocated a massive firing of mid-level and lower-level administrators in American higher education. Not the deans, with all due respect.
I was going to say, where do I sign to resign? I mean,
The deputy deans, the assistant deputy deans, the deputy assistant deputy deans. There are twice as many administrators in American higher education than faculty members, and they cause nothing but trouble. I know because I represent students and faculty members who are pursued, hounded, harassed by these low-level bureaucrats. Firing these people would reduce expenses, student expenses, by somewhere between 40 and 45%. That would lower the need for federal money to support higher education. The problem with federal funding is you get federal control, and it's a huge problem. The feds have done nothing, with the exception of funding, for example, at MIT, some technical programs which were necessary to win wars, for example. The federal funding has done nothing but an aggravation for American higher education and caused incredible damage. So my suggestion is to, and I actually ran twice for the Harvard Board of Overseers. I nearly won once, and guess who was sabotaging my campaign? The bureaucrats. No wonder, because they knew that my goal was to get them all fired. So if we could do that, we solve an enormous number of problems. It's cutting the Gordian knot, so to speak.
Anyone wish to comment or pontificate on that?
I will say that I think that there is some variability on this across the sector. So, one of the things that, and I think that when you get into sort of the really well-endowed private institutions where the budget constraint is almost non-existent, I think you probably see more of this. I think in public institutions, there's more of a budget constraint, and so you've got more real choices to make in terms of with finite resources, and and certainly higher education is not the only set of large bureaucratic institutions that have seem to have sort of a growth problem. I mean, you can look at various forms of government in the United States that sort of seem to have real significant issues with trying to manage their size, and it's hard for me to tell whether or not the answer is how do you. I think large organizations that are in a mature form suffer from these challenges.
Since we're at MIT, it's probably worth remembering that the federal government is the major funder of science in this country. The NSF, the NIH, the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense regularly provide north of $1 billion a year to Research One universities each, and that is what underwrites our science in this country. So we should be careful what we wish for. So if the federal government were to pull back from that, science research would essentially stop.
I think that you're spot on with your analysis. But one of the questions that Bryan asked us was, what programs are you doing to help with the issues of the day and being a college student? And I answered the question, but it's funny, one of my thoughts was budget, and that's not a program, but I do think there's a dotted line to what you're talking about, and that's where a role as a trustee can come in. And you're exactly right. You need government funding that's very, very beneficial and very helpful, but there is academic and administrative bloat. And it had already been solved by the time I got on the board, but 2 years prior to my appointment, there were 26 different budgets at UNC Chapel Hill alone, just our campus. And we've gone to one consolidated budget and made up for, I think it was a $100 million deficit. So there are ways to look at it that don't involve, I guess, cutting funding for research.
I would just add one quick item too, and that is that when we started off, we talked about some of the vulnerabilities that institutions are facing, and one of them that we hear often is this enrollment cliff. And so institutions have become very creative about attracting students and keeping students. And one of the ways they do that is to sort of compete with each other in this business increasingly commercialized attempt. And so part of that is also driving this issue, this fear that there won't be enough students. Well, to support some of the bloat you talk about, some of which I think also happens at higher levels. The number of, I mean, I say this, as a dean myself, so, and having spent most years working up to the level of dean, but from my perspective, I saw a tremendous bloat at the executive level. So I think there's plenty of bloat to share.
Let's go ahead and go to the back. The gentleman in the very, very back had his hand up first.
Thank you for being here and being cautious that I'm advocating. I'm a staff member at MIT Sloan. My name is Ahmed, and being cautious that I'm advocating to basically get rid of my job. I think it is completely agreeable that administrative bloat is an issue, and I'd like to point out that specifically at liberal arts schools, the faculty are overwhelmingly leaning to the left, and I think that's part of the problem, but administrators in particular lean even farther to the left, which I think contributes to the issue against free speech with administration. But getting to my question for the panel, there's this idea, or there's pushed towards institutional neutrality on political issues. I'm sure all of your schools, and correct me if I'm wrong, have some form of like DEI office or department or initiative. And it's obvious to me, maybe you might disagree, that this is inherently a political stance, especially given that they have like DEI offices, but there's no anti-DEI officers, there's no anti-DEI initiatives at schools. Does this go against the idea of institutional neutrality in the political way? And is there any effort, or in your opinion, should there be any effort to get rid of these offices and shut down these programs and remove funding for these programs?
I think that it's something that needs to be addressed and looked at, and kind of to my earlier comment, it's there's not a formula. I mean, you have to get into the weeds, and to use the example, I think that PECO is, the poster policy. That would be a good synonym. You have to, where does the policy align with, what our academic freedom of speech policies are? And so with DEI, one thing we just did with the budget is we took away, I think it was, don't quote me on this, it was right under $3 million out of the budget from DEI and put it towards public safety. And it's things like that, because we had just experienced the campus protest. We got feedback they were feeling that there was anti-Semitic behavior. Rules were not being followed. There were tents being pitched on campus, and as a result, the chief of police came in and arrested people. And then after the fact, we took that money away from DEI and put it towards public safety. So I think there are ways that you can, rather than use the word dismantle certain programs, think through if they're accomplishing what they were set out to do. And I heard twice today in both panels assume good intentions. And I think that is, if you start from that vantage point and then just get down into the nitty gritty, I do think that budget is a place where you can expose a lot of waste.
Real quickly on that, we have a fairly, I think, small footprint in that space. I think, there's a good bit of work that happens. We serve a lot of first-generation college students at Purdue University and in my college. And the DEI space is sort of fused around supporting first-generation students. So that's a significant part of the work there. There are a few other ways that those offices sort of touch on sort of the student success piece, which I think is I think most folks would sort of say are areas that are worthwhile, and I think most even folks on left or right would sort of support that kind of those kinds of efforts. And I think there's and there's a large movement in my university right now about sort of renaming things, which I don't know. It's sort of the DEI is sort of all of a sudden becomes student success, or it becomes something else. And I that also is sort of to me is sort of not doesn't seem quite on the up and up. I mean, but I do think that there is a sort of a bit of a truth in advertising, that what sort of does hang under the DEI space is frequently a lot of things that I don't think a lot of people would realize are under it. And I'm not sure how you reconcile that, but I think that is just a reality of how a lot of universities are organized.
I'm going to exercise chair prerogative. We are near the end of our time, but I want to go through with each of our panelists one more time. And thank you, of course, for piece of advice, guidance, pro tips for alumni concerned about free expression, academic freedom, viewpoint diversity on campuses in their efforts to coordinate with, interact with administrators, trustees, others on campus. What would be your pro tips to them, in brief, starting with Jason here?
Sure. I think education is crucial, so I think that the alumni who are out there should be informed about what the campus is doing. I think a lot of us who are alumni of great institutions haven't kept up on what's actually been happening. So we have a view of what they did a long time ago, and then we hear a few things in the media, but it's really up to our alumni relations and development groups to make sure that our alumni are really well informed about what we're doing now, which I think is much broader and more interesting than you would get from just a few news pieces.
So I mentioned earlier that I have an MBA in management, so I'm hoping none of my faculty are here, because I would recommend that alumni do essentially what this Free Speech Alliance has done, and organize. So I'm not saying unionize, I'm saying organize. But I think that there's tremendous power that alumni wield, and maybe beyond what is necessarily understood. I'm in a position where I support an executive leader on our campus, and so I see when an alumni writes a letter to the president, it gets attention. So when an alumni is a part of an alumni association, it gets more attention. So that would be my suggestion.
Agree with all. Stay informed, ask questions, and I think our board chair said it best. I will always support the administration when I think it's right.
Advice. Again, I'd sort of go back to this sort of mission alignment on sort of the leadership hierarchy of a university. So, it's the MIT Corporation, I believe. The members of the MIT board are members of the MIT Corporation. Is that the right language, I think? So, who is it that's on that group that is an ally of yours? And if you don't have one, that's probably the first step. Like, who are you going to get to work to build that relationship with? Or maybe it's several of them. Working directly with the president, and then working directly with the academic deans. And if you're not sort of making headway in each of those three domains, you're not going to make progress. And everybody, I would sort of say, everybody at the organization is essentially going to be wired to respond to those 3 points of the organization. And so if you can build those relationships, build connectivity, communication, and an agenda across those 3 levels with those key people. And the one good thing about MIT is I think you actually don't have that many deans, academic deans. I think there are 5, 7, I don't know, but you go to a lot of your peers now, I don't know, there are like 20. So you've only got 5 to sort of identify, and I think the MIT board, the corporation is I forget, it's not huge, is it? Oh, it is huge. It is one of these. Is that because I think it is huge? Okay, so that's another. So that's a huge. So try and make it try and get it to be much smaller, and that's a big ask. If you can get it down to about 10 or 12, it'll make your life easier.
Indiana, Central Time is right now working, but no.
there's,
to the
this,
corporation.
well, I think, I don't know, a lot of universities that have these massive boards of, 30, 40, 50 people or more, maybe it's even more, it's very hard to have it governed, 75, to actually get some cohesion around an ability to actually sort of manage it. And it serves a function in terms of connecting out to all of these various alumni groups and other constituents, but it makes the actual management of an institution incredibly difficult.
And it's challenging because boards are often seen as a source of income.
In the private sense, that's certainly true.
Well, it was a great pleasure for me to be able to moderate this discussion today. I thank you all for your time. Please join me in thanking our panel.